They do not speak of the blood, not the blood that spilled from my knuckles when I was 15, working my dead father's fields in the slanting summer heat of Virginia, not the blood of my brother Lawrence, coughing it into linen until the sheets turned the color of rust, nor the blood of the boys who followed me into the forests of Ohio, their bodies left cold in snow, while my name somehow survived. They speak of glory, of greatness, of a father of a nation. But I was not born into myth. I was carved into it, shaped not by destiny, but by desperation, duty, and betrayal, repeated, bitter, and constant. If I became anything more than a man, it is because this nation required a monument, and I let them hammer me into one. But I remember the boy I was. I remember the firewood, the frost that bit my hands when I chopped it for our hearth after father died. I was 11. We were not poor, but grief made us humble. The land needed tending. My mother needed her sons. And I needed purpose. I found it in lines, surveyor's lines. The geometry of property and ambition. It sounds dull, I know, but it gave me precision. A map is a kind of prophecy. And in those Virginia woods, I learned to read terrain, to see battlefields before they existed, before they ever held bodies, or banners, or betrayal. Lawrence, he was the one who mattered then, my elder, my example, my anchor. He had married well, held land, and earned the respect of men. When he fell ill, I followed him to Barbados, hoping sea air would cure him. It didn't, but it gave me smallpox instead. I still bear the scars, shallow craters in my flesh, reminders that fate doesn't favor heroes. It merely tolerates survivors. When Lawrence died, I inherited Mount Vernon. His title, his land, his silence. With it came expectation, but not ease. The world of Virginia planters was laced with politics, with grins to wide, handshakes to firm, and letters laced with subtle threats. I learned quickly that no man is truly free who depends on the mercy of merchants and monarchs. Still, I was loyal. At first, I wore the red coat, served the British crown in the French and Indian War, led men into the thickets of western Pennsylvania through ambushes, starvation, and incompetence. I buried them, too many. I led them into traps I couldn't see coming. My name grew, but so did my doubt. I saw how the British generals treated us, colonial dogs, useful only when dying. One of them, General Braddock, bled to death beside me in the forest. His arrogance killed him. My defiance kept me alive. They promoted me after that, but never gave me a British commission. I was good enough to fight, not to lead. That lesson stuck with me, so when the rumblings of rebellion began, I was not eager, but I was ready. The betrayal of the crown was not sudden. It came in tariffs, in troops quartered in homes, in laws passed by strangers across an ocean. It came in contempt, dripping from Parliament's lips like syrup. We were to pay for their wars, die for their causes, and kneel when they demanded it. But kneeling was never easy for me. I was not radical, not by nature, but I believed in justice. And when justice is denied long enough, what remains is resistance. They asked me to lead the Continental Army, not because I was the best strategist, but because I was visible, measured, and southern. I balanced the revolution. I gave it weight, I gave it presence, but I knew the cost. I remember the first night I wore the uniform of rebellion. It felt heavier than any chain. My wife, Martha, watched me with eyes that had already begun mourning. She knew what was coming, not just war, but the erosion of everything we had built. You don't command a revolution without first surrendering your soul, and I did, willingly. I looked into the eyes of my men at Cambridge and saw hunger, fear, and a desperate kind of hope that I could not promise would be met. But I stood before them anyway. I played the part they needed, firm, noble, unwavering. Inside, I was already calculating food stores, rifle supply, disease control, desertion risk. I was always at war, even with myself, Benedict Arnold. Yes, I knew him, trusted him, promoted him. He saved our campaign at Saratoga. He nearly saved our cause. And yet it was he who betrayed us all. But that's a story for later. For now, remember this. I was not born to be a monument. I was born to bleed, to bury, to lead men who would never see home again. They say I never told a lie. That's a lie itself. I told hundreds, every leader does. But I tried to never betray. That was my code. Even when others did. And trust me, they did. We trusted him. That's what still twists in my gut after all these years. Benedict Arnold was no ordinary officer. He wasn't some farmhand turned musket bearer. He was bold, sharp, and when he entered a room, men straightened their backs. He was the kind of soldier who charged hell if he thought there was a strategic advantage to it. I once thought he was a mirror of myself, raw determination chiseled into flesh. But now, when I hear his name, I don't see courage. I see rot. You must understand, we were losing. Not just battles, faith. At Valley Forge, my men had nothing. Shoes made from rags, frostbitten toes turned black. Men slept in their own sweat and shivered beside dying fires. I walked among them, pretending hope, pretending I still believed. Arnold was one of the few bright lights we had left. After Saratoga, when he routed the British and nearly got himself killed, Congress should have showered him with medals and promotions. But politics, poisoned, petty politics, denied him the credit. They handed promotions to lesser men, men with connections, men with clean uniforms, but no scars. He grew bitter. I saw it, tried to steady him, even wrote to Congress on his behalf. But bitterness, once it takes root, is harder to dig out than any bullet. I made him military governor of Philadelphia, hoping he'd find peace, or at least purpose. But he found Peggy Shippen instead, a loyalist's daughter, raised in elegance, dripping in perfume and royalist pride. Love, lust, or leverage, whatever passed between them, it changed him. She wrapped herself around his ambition, and together, they began to scheme. I didn't know it at the time. That's the part that haunts me. I spoke his name with reverence, even as he plotted to sell the keys to our nation's fort at West Point. He was going to hand it over to the British, in exchange for gold, and a generalship under King George. Imagine that. The very army that turned its back on us. He was willing to wear their colours for coin, and the worst part, he escaped. Major John Andre, the British officer who coordinated with Arnold, was captured and hanged. But Arnold fled, slipped away, like a ghost through the trees, into the enemy's embrace. They gave him a uniform, a title, and the stench of infamy. He tried to justify it, claimed we'd betrayed him first, that he was disrespected, overlooked, unappreciated, that America didn't deserve him. But betrayal is betrayal, no matter how elegant the excuse. I faced my men after that, and I saw their shaken faith. If he could turn, who else might follow? I gathered the officers and stood before the camp. I did not shout. I did not weep. I spoke slowly, clearly. Let Arnold's treason serve as a warning, but not a wound. The cause survives. Our integrity survives. He has abandoned his soul. We will not abandon ours, but I felt it, in my marrow. If Arnold could become a traitor, any man could, including me. That thought never left me. Every letter I signed after that, every dispatch I sent, I questioned myself. I questioned whether my compromises, my decisions, my alliances, whether they were signs of erosion too. Power corrupts. History forgets the small faults and remembers the grand finale. I feared becoming a villain in someone else's story. I grew harder after that, less trusting. I needed spies, loyal ones. We created the Culper Ring, civilian patriots who slipped through British lines, gathering secrets, feeding me information even I sometimes struggled to believe. I never met most of them. They risked their lives for a cause that was bleeding out more by the day. But we held on, Because the war was not just in muskets and trenches. It was in the mind, and betrayal. It's a mental warfare. It poisons unity. So suspicion. That was the British plan all along. Divide, then dominate. Arnold helped them, willingly. I once called him our Hannibal, comparing him to the great Carthaginian general. But he ended more like Brutus, dagger in hand, whispering excuses as he sank the blade. Years later, when the war was over and I had stepped down from command, I heard rumours he regretted it. That his name was spat on even in England. That his children disowned him. That Peggy aged prematurely, bitterness souring even her beauty. I don't know if it's true. I never sought confirmation. Let the punishment come from time, not from me. My own betrayals, yes, I had them too. Not in the political sense, but personal. I betrayed rest. I betrayed my health. I betrayed peace. I told myself I was building something noble. But the men I ordered into battle had families, had lives, had dreams. I sent them to die so that this country might live. Even now, I wonder if they'd agree with the trade. I never wanted to be king. When the whispers rose, crown Washington, let him rule as monarch, I shut them down. I had seen what a king's corruption could do. We did not bleed the soil red just to place another man above the law, and yet the temptation, it lurked. That's the part no one likes to admit. Power feels good, praise feels better, but principle is a cold, thankless companion. And I clung to it like a lifeline. I chose instead to walk away. Before that, before the presidency, before retirement, there was still one last war to win, and it would be the hardest yet. Not against muskets, but against memory. When the war ended, they called me a hero. They brought wine, parades, paintings, and poetry. They sent envoys from France and made my name a symbol. George Washington, the liberator, the general, the founder. They hailed me not as a man, but as a myth, and that terrified me. Victory had a strange taste. Sweet at first, but quickly cloying. We had won freedom, yes, but what were we to do with it? The British were gone, but so were their institutions. Their courts, their banks, their order. We'd fought to remove the crown, but now stood before a blank canvas, armed with nothing but ideals. And that's when the whispers began. Make Washington king, they said, let him rule as monarch. He's earned it, we need one strong man to guide us. I remember the moment vividly. It was spring of 1783, and a group of officers approached me. They spoke cautiously, flattering my legacy. But behind their eyes was a proposition as old as Caesar's Rome. Seize control. The country's unstable. Congress is weak. The people trust you. That offer was a serpent coiled in honey. I smiled, but inside I was on fire. If we do this, I said, we prove the world right. That man cannot govern himself. That liberty is just a mask for tyranny. I turned them away, and then I did the only thing a true patriot could do. I resigned, handed over my commission to Congress, walked away from absolute power when it was mine for the taking. No man in modern history had done that. Not Napoleon, not Cromwell, not Caesar, only me. That, more than any battle I fought, was the true revolution. But fate wasn't finished with me yet. In 1787, the Constitutional Convention was formed. I had retreated to Mount Vernon, determined to live out my days in peace. I spent mornings watching birds skim the Potomac, and nights reading by candlelight. But they pulled me back. Only Washington can preside over the convention, they insisted. My presence, they said, was symbolic. It would unify, so I went. And we built something extraordinary. A republic, 3 branches of government, checks and balances, a system that, if used wisely, could outlive kings. And yet, when the Constitution was ratified, the next chorus began. Washington must be president. I had to laugh. I had not sought power, I had run from it. And now they wanted to hand me the highest office again. But how could I say no? If I refused, the nation might fracture. If I accepted, I risked becoming the very tyrant I swore to resist. So I accepted, with a single vow. I will serve the country, not myself. The presidency was no gilded throne. There were no palaces, no royal guard. I walked to my own inauguration in a brown suit, one hand clenched in nervous tension. I was not ready, but I knew what I had to do. I surrounded myself with strong minds: Jefferson, Hamilton, Knox, Randolph. Men who disagreed, who challenged me, who made me better. And I made sure power never nestled in one corner too long. We set the tone, 2 terms only. No lifetime appointment. No imperial court, just service. But make no mistake, it was not easy. We had no model. Every decision I made carved a precedent into stone. What I said, how I acted, what I allowed. Each action was a blueprint, and I made mistakes. The whiskey rebellion haunts me. Attacks, meant to stabilize the economy, sparked riots. Farmers felt betrayed. They saw me not as their champion, but as a ruler sending troops to enforce federal will. It nearly broke me. I saw in their eyes the same fury we had once held toward King George. And now it was aimed at me, but I quelled it, not with blood, but with restraint. Peace, not punishment. I met rebellion not with gallows, but with understanding. That, I believed, is leadership, still. As my second term ended, the drums beat again. Stay one more, George, they begged. Without you, the Union will crumble, but I had promised. And so I walked away, peacefully, publicly, permanently. Kings do not do that. I returned to Mount Vernon, finally a private citizen once more. And yet, even there, the weight of the presidency lingered. I was called to mediate, to advise, to stand as symbol. But I never once sought power again. Not when Adams took over. Not when Jefferson opposed him. Not when chaos loomed again. I had done my part. I had proved that a man could hold ultimate authority and let it go. That, to me, was the true revolution. And in my heart, I hoped, prayed, that the generations who followed would remember not just my battles, all my speeches, all my victories, but that one simple act, walking away. Because in a world obsessed with power, walking away is the boldest move a man can make. Retirement was not peace, it was reflection, concern, and the cold realization that a man's work does not end simply because he steps down. At Mount Vernon, the air was sweet with tobacco and the river glistened in the sun. But my mind was never at rest, even after all I had done. After refusing a crown, setting the limits of presidential power, and leaving office voluntarily, I worried I had built a temple of freedom on shifting sand. The parties were tearing at each other, Federalists and Republicans. Hamilton and Jefferson, unity had evaporated, and with it, my hope for a government built on reason. I had always feared that factionalism would be our undoing. In my farewell address, I tried to speak to the soul of the nation. I warned you, not as a ruler, but as a father. I said, beware the spirit of party. I said, avoid entangling alliances abroad. I said, cherish the Constitution, but guard it against abuse. But I knew my voice would only echo for so long. Men forget, power corrupts, ambition whispers louder than legacy. I began to feel the weight of my own mortality when letters came begging me to return, this time to lead an army again, against the threat of a French invasion. I hesitated. I was an old man now. My teeth were gone, my hair white. My joints ached every morning, but my duty never faded. President Adams asked me to serve once more as Commander-in-Chief of the Provisional Army, in case war with France became reality. I accepted, not to fight, but to prepare, to teach, to pass on what I knew before it was too late. I didn't take the field again, but I stood ready, and then winter came. It was December of 1799. I had been out in the snow, inspecting the grounds. My throat was sore that night. A chill crept into my chest and clung there. The next morning, I awoke with pain so sharp it was difficult to speak. Doctors came quickly. They bled me, and bled me again, until nearly half my blood was drained in desperate attempts to save me. But I knew I'd stared death in the face many times. In war, in ice, on the battlefield of power. But this time, it smiled back. I asked only for dignity. No prayers, no spectacle. Just the comfort of knowing I had done what I could. That I had chosen the harder path. That I had proven to the world that America would not fall to tyranny, but stand as something new. A republic of principles. In those final hours, I was not thinking of glory, or the countless paintings of my face, or the statues to come. I was thinking of what still remained fragile. The Constitution, the people, the soul of the nation. Would they remember that liberty is not granted once, but earned again every generation? Would they know that freedom dies not from one loud blow, but from thousands of quiet compromises, that betrayal does not always come with a sword, but with a pen, a speech, a whisper in the dark? I hoped they would. I hoped you would. As I took my final breath, I felt the weight of history not as a burden, but as a torch, one I had carried as long as I could. And now, it passed to those who followed. To you, do not forget, I was not a saint. I was a man, a flawed, impatient, sometimes prideful man who refused to be a king, who walked away from power, who believed this country could be more than just a dream. So let my death not be a punctuation mark, but a pause, a reminder, and a call to vigilance. The revolution does not end. It only changes hands. There's something strange about becoming a myth. People no longer see the man, only the monument. They remember the cherry tree, but not the slaves. They speak of my honesty, but not the secrets I kept. They call me father, but forget I made mistakes like any man. So allow me, just once, to tell you what they never do in the school books. Because if my legacy is to endure, it must be whole. Yes, I owned slaves. I did not invent slavery, but I participated in it, benefited from it. My estate, Mount Vernon, was built on the backs of the enslaved, men and women who never tasted the freedom I fought for. I justified it to myself, as many did, called it the way of Virginia, pretended I was kinder, more benevolent. But the truth, no man who claims ownership over another can claim moral clarity. And worse, I broke my own promises. In Philadelphia, where the law required that enslaved people be freed after 6 months, I rotated them secretly across state lines to avoid losing them. Martha and I made it a policy, a system. We did not free them. We played the law like a game. That truth shames me now. Even in death, I tried to do better. In my will, I ordered the emancipation of the enslaved people I owned outright. But it was a partial measure, one that did not touch the dour slaves belonging to Martha's estate. Many remained in bondage long after my bones had turned to dust. This was my greatest contradiction. How could I lead a revolution for liberty while denying it to those who bled in the fields behind my house? The answer: cowardice, custom, and compromise. I feared that without unity among the states, the fragile new union would shatter. So I did not challenge the institution that powered the Southern economy. I believed ending slavery would tear the republic apart before it had roots. But what I should have feared was what would happen, because I didn't. There is more. I helped build a surveillance state before the term even existed. I signed the Jay Treaty, a deal with Britain that split the country and enraged half the population. I thought I was preserving peace, but it cost me friends and almost shattered public faith. In private, I authorized the creation of networks to monitor domestic unrest. After the Whiskey Rebellion, I knew the power of angry farmers and populist rage. I feared it more than I feared British muskets. The irony, I had become the very thing I once fought. I read private correspondence, monitored groups, trusted a few with the power to silence the many. It was all for the good of the nation, always that excuse. But I see now, the road to tyranny is not paved with iron, it's paved with justifications. And yet, there were deeper betrayals still, not of others, of myself. You see, I was not always the calm, rational, fatherly figure etched in marble. I lost my temper, I made rash decisions, I second-guessed my own allies. During the Newbold conspiracy, I nearly lost control of the army. Officers threatened to rebel because Congress refused to pay them. It could have ended in civil war. I begged them to remember the cause, not their wallets. But what stopped them wasn't my speech. It was when I pulled out my glasses and said, "Gentlemen, you must pardon me, for I have grown grey in your service." That one moment of vulnerability broke the room. Not strength, weakness. That was always the secret. People don't follow you because you're perfect. They follow you because you bleed. Because they believe you can suffer for something larger than yourself. If I ever had greatness, it was not in my victories. It was in the burdens I carried so others wouldn't have to. The presidency nearly crushed me. The infighting, the weight of every state's rage, the endless letters, the threats, the isolation. There were nights I sat in candlelight, wondering if we had done the right thing by forming a nation at all. Wondering if it would all fall apart once I was gone. So yes, remember the triumphs. Remember the Delaware crossing, the Constitution, the farewell address. But remember, too, the shadows, the failures. Because no legacy is real without both. When I left the presidency in 1797, I did so with hands trembling. Not from weakness, but from understanding. I knew what would come next. Power rarely gives up its throne without violence or deceit. I was the exception, and I hoped I wouldn't be the last. But hope is a fragile thing. In the years that followed, I watched the country tear itself between Federalists and Democratic Republicans. I watched the Constitution we wrote like sacred scripture become a field of knives in the hands of politicians with bitter egos. I watched as they forgot why we even started. You think betrayal always comes with blades or poison? No. Sometimes it comes dressed in patriotism. Sometimes it wears your own uniform. Sometimes it comes from the mouths of friends. When Thomas Jefferson, my former Secretary of State, began attacking my administration in anonymous editorials, it cut deeper than any British sabre. He, who once dined at my table, now whispered that I was becoming a monarch in disguise. I held my tongue, but in private, I wept for what we were becoming. What I had feared since the first musket fired at Lexington was now showing its face. Not from outside, but within, faction, parties, personal ambition. And I had no illusions that I had prevented it. I had simply delayed it. In my farewell address, I warned them all. The spirit of party agitates the community with ill-founded jealousies and false alarms, kindles the animosity of one part against another ... double quotes. They ignored me. They always do. Because men do not listen to warnings. They build statues to warnings and forget what they stood for. Do not mistake me. I am proud of what we created. The Republic, the Constitution, the peaceful transition of power. These were revolutions in thought as much as in blood. But understand this, I am not the legend you read about. I am the cautionary tale one dares tell. I died in December of 1799, after a throat infection worsened rapidly. The doctors bled me, leech by leech, draining almost half my body's blood in a single day. I suffocated not from fate, but from old medicine and young arrogance. As I lay dying, I said simply, I am just going. Have me decently buried, and do not let my body be put into the vault in less than 2 days. That was all. No glorious final speech, no vision of the stars and stripes, just a tired man in a cold room, lungs tightening, body failing, and perhaps at peace. For I had done the one thing no king, tyrant, or warlord could do. I gave up power, not because I was tired, not because I was weak, but because I believed others must take their turn. and bear the crushing weight that comes with it. You want to talk betrayal? The real betrayal isn't between enemies. It's when leaders betray the future by clinging to the present. It's when legacies become shackles, when founders become idols, immune to criticism, when revolutions rot into rituals. If you remember me, don't just remember the victories. Remember that I was wrong, that I failed many, that I compromised when I should have acted, but I never gave up the experiment. The idea that a nation could be born not from lineage, but from consent. That power could be borrowed, not seized. That people could govern themselves. And learn from men like me, not to repeat our sins. That's the real inheritance I leave behind. Not Mount Vernon, not the Constitution, but a question. Will you be brave enough to improve what we built, even if that means tearing parts of it down?